The party was in full swing, the lights dimmed to a soft, golden glow as laughter and clinking glasses filled the air. Martin stood with his colleagues near the bar, a drink in hand, his arm casually draped around the shoulders of a woman who was not his wife. The woman, a younger and clearly more attractive figure, clung to him with a smile that almost seemed too practiced. "So, Martin," one of his colleagues, Paul, asked casually, sipping his own drink, "why didn't you bring your wife tonight? You two always seem inseparable." Martin laughed, a hollow, dismissive sound that barely touched his eyes. "Oh, well, she's not up for it," he said with a shrug. "You know, with the baby and all, she's too busy at home. And frankly, she's not exactly the life of the party anymore." He paused, looking around to make sure everyone was listening. "I mean, have you seen her? She's put on so much weight since the baby. I can barely get her to fit into anything anymore. And don't get me started on her appearance. Who would want to bring someone like that out to a fancy event?" Laughter erupted around the table, including from his mistress, who giggled in a way that made Martin's chest swell with pride. The others joined in, their cruel amusement filling the air like poison. "And you know," Martin continued, his words sharper now, "she can't even do the simplest things right. I told her to get dressed for a night out, and she spent hours trying to find something that didn't make her look like a bloated housewife. I'm telling you, it's embarrassing." More laughter followed, as his colleagues exchanged looks of amusement. Martin glanced at the woman beside him, her face glowing with approval as she clung to his arm like an accessory. It was in this moment, as he basked in the mockery of his wife, that the door to the ballroom suddenly swung open. The room fell into a hush, and all eyes turned to the entrance. There, standing in the doorway, was a woman who seemed to command the room's attention. She wore an elegant, form-fitting black dress that accentuated every curve of her body, her hair styled perfectly, and her makeup flawless. Her presence was magnetic. Martin's breath caught in his throat. It was Layla, his wife. The shock that spread across his face was palpable. It took a moment for him to compose himself, and when he finally did, his lips curled into a tight smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. He pushed past the crowd, heading straight for her. "Layla," he snapped, his voice low but laced with fury. "What are you doing here? I told you to stay home." His hand shot out, grabbing her arm in a tight grip and pulling her toward their table. The laughter from their colleagues faded as they watched the exchange unfold. Some of them, unsure of what to make of the situation, whispered among themselves. Layla, unfazed by the attention, allowed herself to be pulled toward the table, her expression calm but her heart racing. "Why didn't you listen to me?" Martin continued, now standing in front of her, his words dripping with disdain. "What are you trying to prove by showing up here? You think you can just come and parade around like this? Do you honestly think anyone here will respect you looking like that?" Layla's lips parted as if she were about to speak, but before she could, Martin raised his voice again, louder now for the others to hear. "Look at you," he spat. "You've let yourself go. You're a disgrace. You don't belong here." The table of colleagues began to laugh again, and even the mistress chimed in, her voice a sharp, mocking laugh that made Martin's chest swell with satisfaction. He reveled in their cruelty, in the way they validated his words. Layla's face remained expressionless, though her hands trembled slightly at her sides. It wasn't until the host of the party, a tall man with graying hair, stepped onto the stage that everything shifted. The music died down, and the room fell silent. He smiled, his voice rich with authority and warmth. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please," the host began, his tone commanding but gentle. "It is with great pride that I stand before you today, not just as the host of this gathering, but as a father introducing the future of my legacy." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. "I've spent my life building a company and fortune that I am proud to pass on to someone who truly deserves it. And I can think of no better person to carry on this work than my beloved daughter." The room gasped collectively, confusion rippling through the crowd. Martin, still holding Layla's arm with a mixture of contempt and frustration, didn't fully process the words until the host added the final piece of the puzzle. "Layla," he said, turning to the woman standing next to him. "This is my daughter, and I'm proud to announce that I am retiring today and passing on everything to her." A dead silence swept through the crowd. Martin's eyes widened in disbelief as he looked at the woman he had just humiliated. His wife. The same woman he had cruelly dismissed moments ago, was the very heiress to the wealth and company he had longed to be associated with. The laughter from the table died instantly, replaced by a tense, awkward silence. The room stood still in stunned silence, as if the very air had thickened with disbelief. Martin, his face ashen, stared at Layla as though he were seeing a completely different person. The woman he had belittled, the one he had called fat and unattractive just moments before, was now standing before him, the heiress to an empire. The laughter that had once echoed around the table now died, replaced by a suffocating quiet that filled the space with tension. Layla didn't flinch, didn't even blink. She stood tall, her posture perfect, her eyes unwavering as she faced the man who had reduced her to nothing in front of their colleagues. Her father, the host of the party, had introduced her not as a wife, but as the future of his business, a powerful force in her own right. The once vulnerable woman, who had hidden in the shadows of Martin's cruelty, was no longer the same. The silence stretched long enough for Martin to finally find his voice, though it came out in a strained whisper. "Layla," he said, his voice cracking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "What is this? Why didn't you tell me?" Layla's gaze remained cold as ice. "Tell you," she repeated, her voice calm but firm. "What would I have told you, Martin? That I am not the woman you've treated me as? Or that I am not the weak, humiliated woman you've spent years degrading?" Her words were like daggers, each one piercing deeper into Martin's chest. The people around them exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether they should intervene or simply watch the drama unfold. Martin's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He was trapped in the web of his own lies and arrogance. The mistress, who had been clinging to Martin's arm like a shadow, now stood at a distance, her eyes wide with shock. She hadn't expected any of this. As Layla stood there, radiating strength and beauty, the other woman's confidence crumbled. She had been nothing more than an accessory to Martin's vanity, and now, seeing the reality of Layla's true identity, she understood that she had no place in this world. Martin turned to face his colleagues, his voice desperate as he tried to regain control of the situation. You didn't know about her family, right?" he asked, his eyes scanning the room. "She's just my wife. But the words were hollow, and the more he spoke, the more it became evident that he had lost all credibility. Paul, the colleague who had once laughed at Martin's insults about Layla, now looked uncomfortable. We had no idea," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I mean, we thought she was just," he trailed off, the realization dawning on him that they had all been complicit in Martin's cruelty. Martin's eyes darted back to Layla, his expression morphing from disbelief to anger. "You've been lying to me all this time?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Hiding this from me? Hiding who you really are?" Layla's lips curved into a small, bitter smile. "Lying?" she echoed. "No, Martin. I've been protecting you. I've been hiding the truth from you because I didn't want to crush your fragile ego. But now," she said, her tone hardening, "I think it's time you learned the truth." The host of the party, who had been observing the exchange from the stage, cleared his throat and spoke again, his voice calm but authoritative. "Everyone, I believe we've all seen enough. I think it's clear what's at stake here tonight." He turned to Layla with a proud smile. "My daughter, Layla, will now be taking over the reins of the business. It's time for her to step into her rightful place." The room erupted into whispers as Layla's true power and position were fully revealed. Martin stood frozen, his mind spinning as he tried to comprehend what was happening. This was not the woman he had known. This was not the meek, silent wife he had humiliated for years. This was someone entirely different, someone far more formidable than he could ever have imagined. "Isn't that right, Martin?" Layla's voice cut through the noise, her gaze still locked on him. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words were stuck. The reality of the situation was too much for him to grasp. He had torn her down, publicly humiliated her, and now he was standing in front of the very woman who could destroy him with a single word. He had always assumed his place in the world was secure, until now. Martin's knees felt weak, and for a moment he considered leaving, escaping this nightmare. But he was trapped. The truth had been laid bare, and he could do nothing to undo the damage. Layla took a step forward, her eyes never leaving his. "I think it's time we go," she said softly, but her words were filled with finality. The crowd parted as she made her way toward the exit, Martin's eyes following her. He wanted to speak, to apologize, but the words wouldn't come. The woman he had dismissed and degraded had just taken everything from him. The air was thick with tension as the final moments of the party unraveled. The doors had barely closed behind Layla as she exited the ballroom, her heels clicking steadily against the marble floor. Martin stood frozen at the center of the room, his chest tight, his mind scrambling for something, anything, that could salvage his crumbling world. The silence in the room was deafening, a contrast to the lively chatter that had filled it just minutes earlier. People shifted uncomfortably, their glances flicking toward Martin, then quickly away, unsure of how to act. No one knew how to process the scene that had just unfolded before them. Paul, the colleague who had been laughing at Martin's earlier insults, looked around, his face pale. What just happened?" he murmured, his voice low. The mistress, still clutching the glass in her hand, had shifted away from Martin, her body language now distant. She was no longer the object of his attention, her flirtations now a silent reminder of just how little control he had over his own life. Her eyes darted nervously between Martin and the others in the room, clearly aware that the situation had shifted irrevocably. "Martin, what the hell is going on?" another colleague asked, his voice laced with confusion. "You never said she was this. You never said she was." "Stop," Martin interrupted, his voice barely a whisper, his face twisting in frustration. He wanted to scream, to lash out, but no words came. The reality of the moment crushed him. The woman he had treated as nothing more than a weak, unattractive housewife was now the heiress to one of the wealthiest families in the country, and he had just humiliated her in front of the entire city. He could feel the eyes of everyone on him now, eyes that had once admired him but were now filled with judgment and pity. The host, Layla's father, stood at the stage, his presence a commanding force. His words echoed in Martin's mind as they repeated over and over. "This is my daughter, and I am proud to announce that I am retiring today and passing everything on to her." The weight of that declaration pressed down on him like a leaden weight. Everything, the fortune, the company, the influence, was now hers. His entire life, everything he had believed was his for the taking, was crumbling before him, and it had been at his own hand. He glanced at the table where Layla had stood just moments ago. The faces of his colleagues were no longer friendly. Their smiles were gone. Now they exchanged uneasy looks, each of them probably wondering the same thing. How much of this man's life was a lie? "Martin," Paul said again, his voice carrying a sense of disbelief. You really didn't know?" He shook his head, as if he still couldn't understand the gravity of the situation. "You didn't know who she was?" "No," Martin said sharply, his eyes wild. "I had no idea. I never knew." He trailed off, trying to put his thoughts into words, but they came out in fragments. She never told me. She never told me she was her father's daughter. Never." But even as the words escaped him, a part of Martin knew that this was a lie. Layla had never been the type to brag about her family, but she had never hidden the truth either. He had simply never bothered to ask. He had never cared. His colleagues exchanged glances, and slowly, as if they had all reached the same unspoken conclusion, they began to disperse. There was nothing more to see here. Martin's reputation had been tarnished, his standing in the room shattered, and no one wanted to stay to watch the downfall of a man they had once respected. By the time he left the ballroom and stepped into the night air, Martin felt like a ghost in his own skin. The city lights outside seemed too bright, too harsh. They illuminated his defeat, casting long, distorted shadows on the ground beneath him. A few minutes later, Martin's car sped through the city, the tires screeching against the pavement as if they, too, were trying to escape the weight of the night's events. He had tried calling Layla, no answer. Then he tried again. Still nothing. As he approached their home, his pulse quickened. The house loomed in the distance, a silent reminder of the life he had built, or rather, the life he thought he had built. He pulled into the driveway, his hands shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. He didn't know what to expect. What could he possibly say to her after everything that had happened? He had humiliated her, called her ugly, useless, even laughed at her. He had reduced her to nothing in front of everyone, his colleagues, his mistress. And now here he was, hoping for some kind of miracle. He got to the gate of their house, but met some burly men all in black standing and obstructing his access to the house. All efforts he made to go into his own home proved abortive. It then dawned on him that Layla was now manifesting in her full power, and that what he was hoping would be and dream was now clear it was a reality. He stayed at the gate hoping to talk to Layla, but was prevented. Meanwhile, back inside the house, Layla has returned to pack her things from the house she had spent almost how many years of her life in. As she stepped through the door, the soft click of her heels echoing in the empty hallway. The house felt quiet, almost hollow, in contrast to the storm of emotions swirling inside her. As she walked further into the dimly lit space, her mind drifted back to a time before this. The time when everything seemed simple, when her life had felt full of promise and possibility. She moved toward the living room, her gaze drifting over the furniture they had chosen together, the photographs that lined the walls, images of happier times. The room was now a silent testament to the life she had once believed in. It all felt so far away now, almost unreal. Sitting down on the couch, Layla let out a slow breath, her fingers absently tracing the edges of a photo frame. The face staring back at her was young and full of hope. It was the face of the woman who had once believed in love, in the man who had captured her heart, and in a future they would build together. But that woman was gone now, replaced by someone hardened by betrayal, deception, and regret. The memory lane. It had all started 5 years ago, back when Layla had first met Martin. It was at a casual dinner party hosted by a mutual friend. Nothing fancy, just a small gathering of people from various walks of life. She had been there reluctantly, dragged along by her friend, who insisted that she needed to get out more. At the time, Layla had been content to stay in the background, as she always had, avoiding the spotlight that always seemed to find her. And then she saw him. Martin was standing in a corner, nursing a drink in his hand, talking animatedly with someone. His brown eyes sparkled with a sort of quiet confidence that immediately drew her in. He wasn't the kind of man who demanded attention, but there was something about him that made you notice him without even realizing it. He was handsome in a way that wasn't obvious, more of a subtle, unassuming charm. His smile was easy, his laugh genuine. There was something refreshing about him, something that made Layla feel at ease in a way she hadn't felt in years. He wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. He wasn't powerful. But to her, none of that mattered. He was real. He wasn't intimidated by her family name, her wealth, or the expectations that came with it. He didn't see her as a billion-dollar heiress. He saw her as Layla. They had talked for hours that night, and from the very first conversation, she felt a connection that she hadn't experienced before. It was easy with him. He made her laugh, made her feel like she was just another person. There was no pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other. Over the next few weeks, they saw each other more and more. Martin was kind, thoughtful, and ambitious in a way that resonated with Layla. He worked hard in a career that didn't come with the privileges she was used to, and yet he was content. His life was simple, and in its simplicity, there was a charm that captivated her. But even as they grew closer, Layla struggled with a secret she couldn't share. She knew that if she told him who she really was, the heiress to a vast fortune, he would treat her differently. She had seen it before, with men and women who only saw her family's wealth, not the person behind the name. She didn't want that. She wanted Martin to love her for who she was, not what she had. And so she hid it. She kept the truth about her family from him, letting him believe she was just another woman trying to make her way in the world without the baggage of wealth and legacy. Months passed, and the connection between them deepened. Layla had never felt so comfortable, so alive in a relationship. They spent weekends traveling to quaint little towns, exploring art galleries, going on hikes, things she had never thought to do before. It was the kind of life she had always wanted, but had never been able to experience in her world of private jets, luxurious mansions, and endless expectations. One evening, after a particularly romantic dinner at a small Italian restaurant, Martin had taken her hand in his and looked into her eyes with an intensity that took her breath away. "Layla," he had said softly, "I can't imagine my life without you in it. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." At that moment, her heart had skipped a beat. It felt as though the universe had aligned, as though everything had led to this one perfect moment. For once, she was just a woman in love, and he was just a man who wanted to marry her. And so, despite her reservations, despite the fear of what might happen if her secret came out, she had said yes. The wedding had been small, quiet, intimate, just close friends and family. Layla had chosen a simple dress, avoiding anything too extravagant. It was a far cry from the lavish celebrations that would have come with her family's wealth. And it had been perfect. They had settled into a modest home, living a life that was, in many ways, what Layla had always dreamed of. There were no photographers lurking at every corner, no media buzz surrounding her every move. It was just her and Martin, and she had convinced herself that that was enough. But soon the cracks started to show. At first, it was small things, comments Martin made about her weight, about how she looked. "You've been eating too much lately," he'd say when she'd sit down for a meal, his tone casual, as though it were just an offhand remark. "You don't want to get too heavy, do you?" It didn't take long for those little comments to become more biting. As time went on, the weight of his words began to settle into her. He started calling her lazy for not losing the pregnancy weight as quickly as he thought she should. He'd make cruel jokes about how unattractive she looked, even when she tried her best to keep herself together. "You used to be beautiful, Layla," he'd say with a smirk, as though he was offering her a compliment. What happened? The hurt from those words cut deeper than she'd ever imagined. But she kept quiet. She didn't want to make a scene. She didn't want to rock the boat. And so she endured. For years, Layla kept up the charade of being the average woman Martin had fallen in love with. She let him believe that her life was just like his, full of struggle, ambition, and quiet dreams. But in reality, she was suffocating. She was a woman trapped between two worlds. The world of her family's fortune and legacy, and the world of Martin's cruel and dismissive reality. In her quiet moments, she wondered if she had made a mistake. But it was too late to turn back. She had married him. She had chosen him. And now she was trapped. The car ride back to Layla's family estate was quiet, with only the hum of the engine filling the silence. Layla sat back against the plush leather seat, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, but her mind was elsewhere, drifting back to the years that had led up to this very moment. She had been on this path for so long, trying to bury the truth of her marriage beneath layers of compromise and sacrifice. But now that it had all come to light, she couldn't stop herself from replaying the events, the decisions that had brought her here. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, one she hadn't heard in months. "I don't want you marrying that man, Layla. I don't trust him." At the time, she had brushed it off, convinced that she could handle it, that she was in love and would make it work. But now, as she thought about how things had unfolded, she realized how little she had listened to his warning. Her father had always been protective of her, perhaps overly so. He had seen firsthand how the world could take advantage of wealth, of status. And Layla, despite her independence and strength, had always been his little girl. When she first introduced Martin to him, she had hoped that her father's reservations would fade with time. But it didn't. From the beginning, her father had sensed something off about him. He had seen Martin's charm, of course, but he had also seen the underlying greed in his eyes. Her father didn't need to be a business magnate to know that some people were only interested in status, in power, and Martin had never truly loved her. He had only ever wanted her for what she could give him. But Layla had been determined. She had believed deep down that she could make it work. She had fallen for his warm smile, for his ability to make her feel like the center of his world. She had convinced herself that her family's wealth didn't matter to her, that it wasn't a factor in her choice of a life partner. Until it was. As the years passed, Martin's behavior grew increasingly controlling and cruel. At first, the insults were subtle. Remarks about how she could have tried harder to look a certain way, how she had let herself go after having their child. It had chipped away at her self-esteem, piece by piece, until the woman who once held her head high had become a shadow of herself. The isolation began slowly. Layla had always been a sociable woman, surrounded by friends and loved ones. But over time, as Martin's verbal jabs and cutting remarks became more frequent, Layla found herself retreating from the people she cared about. She stopped answering calls, made excuses for canceling plans, and kept to herself more and more. She thought it was just a phase, that maybe things would improve once they had settled into a routine with their new baby. But the emotional distance between her and Martin only grew. He had stopped pretending to care about her well-being, and had become obsessed with controlling her every move. His cruel remarks about her weight, her appearance, and even her intelligence began to wear on her. It was only when Layla's best friend, Claire, came to visit that the truth finally came to light. It was one of those rare moments when Layla had actually managed to escape the house, even if it was just for a brief outing. She hadn't told Martin where she was going. She knew he wouldn't approve, but Claire had insisted on seeing her. She had come over despite Layla's protests, sensing something was off in their friendship. Claire had always been sharp, perceptive, and loyal. When Claire entered the house, Layla's heart sank. She didn't want her friend to see the way things had become. But Claire was relentless. She barged into the living room, her eyes scanning the space, her smile fading when she saw the state of things. The tension in the air was thick, and Layla could feel her friend's gaze on her, sensing the exhaustion in her posture, the dark circles beneath her eyes. Before Layla could stop her, Claire walked into the kitchen, and that's when she saw it all. The broken glass, Layla's attempts at cleaning it up, the baby lying in the crib as Layla stumbled around, trying to juggle it all. She was tired. So tired. She saw Martin in the next room, sitting comfortably with a smug look on his face as he barked orders at her. His voice was a low growl, filled with disdain. He belittled her for dropping the glass, mocked her for being too clumsy, too tired, and too fat to even manage something as simple as washing dishes. Claire's face turned red with fury. She marched up to Layla, grabbed her by the arm, and pulled her away from the scene. "Layla, what the hell is going on?" she demanded. Layla's throat tightened, and she could feel the tears welling up, but she fought them back. "Please, Claire, don't say anything. I don't want him to know I told you." But Claire wasn't having it. "No, Layla. This isn't just between you and him. You deserve better than this. You're worth more than this." That was the moment when Layla knew things had gone too far. She had kept quiet for so long, but the truth was beginning to seep through the cracks. Though Claire had promised to keep her secret, Layla knew deep down that her friend wouldn't be able to. Claire was too loyal, too angry at what Martin was doing to her. The next day, Layla's worst fear was realized. Claire called her father. Layla had tried to stop her, but it was too late. Her father, always concerned, had listened with growing fury as Claire detailed the toxic environment in which Layla was living. He had known something was wrong for months, but hearing it from someone else, someone who had seen the emotional abuse firsthand, made him snap. He had tried to intervene before, but Layla had always been too stubborn, too proud to listen. But now, with his daughter's well-being at risk, he decided it was time to take action. And so he planned the party, the grand reveal that would shake everything to its core. He would make sure everyone knew exactly who Layla was, not the woman they had thought her to be, but the daughter of the most influential businessman in the city. He would ensure that Martin could never again treat her as if she were anything less than the powerful, capable woman she was. The evening before the party, the house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rustling of the trees outside. Layla had just put their baby to sleep and was seated on the worn-out couch in the living room, her hands nervously wringing together. She knew she shouldn't bother asking Martin about the party. He had made it clear over the past months that her presence at public events was unnecessary, but tonight felt different. This party was important. Not only was it a prestigious gathering hosted by one of the wealthiest and most influential families in the city, but it also represented an opportunity for them to present themselves as a couple, something they hadn't done in what felt like ages. Layla hoped, foolishly perhaps, that this could be a turning point for them. When Martin finally walked into the living room, his tie loosened and his shirt slightly wrinkled from a long day at work, she swallowed her nervousness and stood up. "Martin," she began softly, her voice trembling just enough to betray her nerves. "I was wondering about the party later tonight. Can I come with you?" He stopped in his tracks, blinking at her as if she'd just asked him to do something outrageous. A slow, mocking smile curled his lips as he set down his briefcase. "You? To the party?" He let out a sharp laugh that echoed through the room. "Layla, do you even hear yourself? What on earth makes you think I'd take you to an event like that?" Her heart sank, but she tried to hold her ground. "I just thought, since it's a formal event and most people will be bringing their partners." "Formal event," he interrupted, shaking his head. "Layla, have you seen yourself in a mirror lately? You don't belong at a formal event. You don't belong at any event." The words cut deeper than any knife. She felt her throat tighten, but she forced herself to speak. "Martin, I've been working hard to lose the baby weight. I know I'm not back to where I was, but—" "Not back to where you were?" he repeated, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "You're not even close. Look at you. You're a mess, Layla. You don't fit into the image I need to present at a party like this." Her eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. "I just want to be there with you, as your wife. Please, Martin. Stop it, Layla. Stop embarrassing yourself." His voice rose, sharp and cruel. "Do you think anyone wants to see you waddling around in a dress you probably won't even fit into? You'll ruin everything." The tears spilled over, but she didn't move. She couldn't. Her feet felt glued to the floor as she watched the man she had once loved twist the knife even further. "And another thing," he added, his eyes narrowing. "I've already invited someone else." Layla blinked, her breath hitching. "What?" Martin didn't look the least bit remorseful. If anything, he seemed almost pleased with himself as he pulled out his phone and tapped on the screen. "I called her this afternoon, but since you're so insistent, let me confirm again." He pressed the speakerphone button, and a cheerful female voice answered almost immediately. "Hey Martin, are we still on for tomorrow night?" "Of course, darling," Martin said smoothly, glancing at Layla with a smirk. "I wouldn't want to go with anyone else." Layla's stomach churned as she listened to the conversation unfold, the flirtatious tone in his voice and the easy laughter from the other woman. She felt like she was drowning, but Martin didn't seem to notice, or care. "I'll pick you up at 7, he continued. "Make sure you wear something stunning. I want everyone to be jealous." The call ended, and Martin turned back to Layla, his expression one of pure indifference. "There. Problem solved." She stared at him, her tears now falling freely. "How could you do this to me? I'm your wife, Martin. Do I mean nothing to you?" He rolled his eyes. "Don't start with the dramatics, Layla. You brought this on yourself. If you want me to treat you differently, then look the part. Until then, don't embarrass me." Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, shattered. Layla stood frozen for what felt like hours, the sound of the phone call still ringing in her ears. The man she had sacrificed so much for, the man she had believed in, had just publicly humiliated her in her own home. For years, she had endured his insults, his coldness, his condescension. She had told herself that things would get better, that the man she had fallen in love with was still there somewhere. But tonight, as he walked away without a second thought, she knew she had been lying to herself. There was nothing left. No love, no respect, no hope. She turned and walked to the nursery, where her baby lay sleeping peacefully. Her tears fell silently as she watched the rise and fall of her daughter's chest. This was why she had stayed. This was why she had endured. But as she stood there, her heart heavy with pain, a new resolve began to take shape. She wouldn't fight for Martin's love anymore. She wouldn't beg, cry, or plead. He didn't deserve it. Tonight would be a new day. A day that would change everything. And this time it would be her choice. The morning after the party, Layla woke up in her old childhood bedroom, the rich scent of lavender filling the air. The large windows offered a breathtaking view of the estate's expansive grounds. But today, her mind was far from the beauty of the place. She lay on her back, staring up at the ceiling, her thoughts heavy and clouded. The events of last night, the humiliation, the dramatic reveal, seemed like a dream. But the reality of what had happened was undeniable. It was no longer just about surviving Martin's cruelty. It was about reclaiming her life, her identity, and her future. Layla had spent the night here at her father's estate after the party, unable to face the idea of returning to the home she had shared with Martin. She hadn't spoken to him since the reveal. She hadn't needed to. Her father's words, spoken with quiet authority, had made everything clear. This was no longer just a marriage. It was a battle for control, and Layla was done being a victim. But what had come next, how the world had shifted, how people had reacted, was what she hadn't expected. The fall from grace that Martin was about to experience was just beginning. The morning after the party, the phone calls began. First, it was Martin, of course. She had expected it. He was likely pacing around, enraged, trying to explain himself, perhaps trying to justify the insults he had thrown her way. But Layla didn't pick up. She couldn't bear to hear him attempt to spin the story, as if she was the one who had made a spectacle of herself. Then came the calls from his colleagues. Each one had a similar tone, awkward, unsure, uncomfortable. They knew, just like Martin, that everything had changed. There were no apologies, no remorse, just an eerie sense of self-preservation. They had all laughed when he made his cruel comments about Layla. They had all humiliated her with him. But now, as the daughter of the wealthiest man in the city, the situation was different. Now it was their turn to be afraid. Layla didn't pick up any of those calls either. She had no need for their apologies, their empty words. She wasn't a pawn in their game anymore. She wasn't a joke. But then, there was the call she had been dreading, from her father. "Layla." His voice was firm but laced with concern. "How are you?" She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words. Her father, the one person who had always protected her, who had warned her against Martin from the start, had now seen the truth unfold before him. He had been forced to witness the cruelty that had been part of her life for years. "I'm fine, Dad," she said quietly, though the lump in her throat betrayed her calm words. "I'm just processing everything." Her father paused. She could hear the sound of papers rustling in the background, the familiar noise of his office. "I know this is a lot, Layla, but you need to understand something. That man, Martin, he doesn't deserve you. He never did. You were always too good for him. I know you wanted to believe in him, but he's nothing more than a parasite." Her father's words, as harsh as they were, felt like a release. For the first time in a long time, Layla felt the weight of her own choices lift. She wasn't alone. Her father had always known she deserved better, and now he was standing beside her. "I've been thinking, Layla," her father continued. "We need to make sure you're safe, that you're in a position to take control of your own future. I want you to come back here for a while. We'll talk about everything. The company, the assets, what comes next for you." Layla nodded, even though her father couldn't see her. She knew he meant well, but a part of her couldn't ignore the lingering question in her mind. What now? Despite everything, Layla knew she had to face him at some point. The truth needed to be spoken. No more hiding, no more silencing herself. She had to make him understand that this wasn't just about him making a fool of her in front of his colleagues. It was about everything he had done to her in their marriage. The phone call came late in the afternoon. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the phone, the weight of the moment sinking in. She had no idea what to expect from Martin, but she couldn't let him control the narrative any longer. "Layla," his voice was strained, almost desperate. "I don't know what happened last night. I don't know what came over me, but you need to come back home. You don't understand what you've done, what this is going to do to us. The company." She cut him off, her voice steady and cold. "No, Martin. I understand perfectly well what happened last night, and what you did. You humiliated me in front of your friends, in front of everyone who mattered to you. I was your wife, Martin, and I didn't deserve that." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Layla could hear him breathing, but he didn't speak. She pressed on. "I'm not coming back. I'm done with this marriage. I'm done with you." His response was a growl of frustration. "You think you can just walk away from this? You think you can leave everything behind? You don't even know what you're doing. You can't just." "I've already walked away, Martin. You just haven't realized it yet." The line went dead. For a long time, Layla sat in the silence of her room, the weight of what she had just done settling over her like a heavy cloak. It wasn't just the end of her marriage. It was the end of everything she had allowed herself to believe about love, about sacrifice, about what she deserved. But as she looked out the window, her gaze fixed on the city skyline in the distance, Layla knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. Days passed, and Martin's attempts to contact her grew more frantic. He sent messages, left voicemails, but Layla ignored them all. Her father had already made it clear that Martin wasn't to set foot near the estate. And even though she was surrounded by her father's protective measures, there was still an unsettling feeling deep within her. Her life, as she had known it, was gone. The world she had built with Martin, the false sense of security, had crumbled in one evening. But now a new chapter was about to begin. Layla was no longer the quiet, humiliated wife. She was the daughter of the most powerful businessman in the city. She was someone to be reckoned with. And Martin would soon learn exactly how much power she wielded. Weeks had passed since that fateful night at the party, and Martin's attempts to regain control over his life, and Layla, had only become more desperate. His world, once filled with admiration and respect, was now a shattered mirror, each piece reflecting his deepening regret and humiliation. The power of Layla's revelation, the truth of her heritage, had ripped away everything he had once believed was in his grasp. Martin knew he was losing her, but what could he do now? She had gone silent, no longer the woman he could push around or mock. She had retreated to her father's estate, a fortress of wealth and influence where Martin was no longer welcome. Every call he made to her went unanswered, every message ignored. He had burned all the bridges, and now there was nothing left to cling to. It was not just the humiliation that stung. It was the realization that he had destroyed the only good thing in his life. The woman who had been the quiet, devoted wife, the one who had supported him through his mediocrity, was gone. And in her place, a woman who knew her worth, who knew exactly what he had done to her, had risen. Still, he couldn't help himself. He couldn't admit defeat. Martin continued to visit her father's mansion every day, but was never allowed in. He had told himself that one visit would be enough to explain, to apologize, to make her see how sorry he was. But each visit only deepened his frustration. Back at the estate, Layla was slowly adjusting to her new life. The first few days had been filled with quiet reflection, but now, she was beginning to make decisions. Her father had already made it clear that she was in control now, of the company, of the future. She wasn't just a woman who had been humiliated. She was a force to be reckoned with. But even as she embraced her new identity, a part of her still couldn't shake the weight of what Martin had done to her. It wasn't just about his insults. It was about the years of manipulation, the silent cruelty that had built up until it was impossible to ignore. Her phone rang, and the caller ID read Martin. She stared at the screen for a moment, the name an unwelcome reminder of her past life. She let the phone ring out, not even bothering to pick up. He had done his worst, and she had endured it. But no longer. Her thoughts shifted back to her father. He had given her everything, his wealth, his power, his protection. But more importantly, he had always been her advocate. From the moment she had told him about Martin, he had been firm in his belief that she deserved better. He had offered her a future, a chance to take control of her own destiny. But that didn't mean she was ready to destroy Martin. One evening, as she sat in her father's study, staring out at the sprawling estate, her father entered. He had been keeping a close eye on everything, his protective instincts never far from the surface. "You're not answering his calls," he remarked, his tone even, but there was a trace of concern in his voice. "I know, Dad," Layla replied, her voice steady but cold. "He's not getting another chance. Not from me." Her father nodded, understanding the finality in her voice. "He doesn't deserve you, Layla. And you deserve so much more than him." Layla let out a long breath, her hands folding on the desk before her. "I know, but I can't be the one to ruin him. I won't destroy him. He's made his choices, and I've made mine. But I won't be the one to finish him off." Her father raised an eyebrow, surprised by the sudden shift in her tone. "Layla, you have the power to do it. You've seen the way people turn on him. He's weak, and his reputation is in tatters. You could expose him. Make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man he is." "I could," Layla said softly, her gaze distant. "But I'm not going to. I won't lower myself to that level." Her father didn't press further, but the look in his eyes told her he was still wary. "Just be careful, my dear. People like him don't change easily." As Layla moved on with her life, Martin's world continued to crumble. The fallout from the party, from his behavior, was starting to take its toll. His colleagues distanced themselves from him, no longer willing to put their trust in a man who had been so easily humiliated by his own wife. The company he had once dreamed of leading was now slipping from his grasp, and every door that had once been open to him now seemed closed. His reputation had been tarnished beyond repair. He was no longer the man he once was, the confident, charming figure who had easily captivated those around him. He had become a cautionary tale, a figure of mockery. But despite everything, he still clung to the hope that Layla would forgive him, that somehow he could return to the life he had known. But Layla had made her decision, and there was no going back. Martin had underestimated her strength, her ability to rise above the humiliation. He had thought she would always be the quiet, submissive wife. But she wasn't. She was a woman with a legacy, with power, and with a future that no longer included him. Weeks turned into months, and Layla's life continued to flourish. She took the reins of her father's business with confidence, rebuilding the legacy that had been threatened by her marriage. She was no longer the woman who had silently endured insults, the woman who had been overlooked and dismissed. She was the heiress of one of the most powerful families in the city, and she had learned the value of self-worth. One afternoon, as she sat in the office, reviewing business proposals, a knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Her father entered, holding an envelope in his hand. "This came for you," he said, handing it over. Layla opened it and found a letter from Martin, his handwriting barely legible, his words shaky. "Layla," it began, "I can't begin to express how sorry I am. I've lost everything, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging you to give me one last chance. I've realized how wrong I was. Please, Layla, I'm lost without you." She read the letter in silence, her heart heavy with a mix of emotions. She had expected this, expected him to crawl back, to beg for forgiveness. But she had already made her choice. With a calm sigh, she set the letter aside. "It's too late, Martin," she whispered to herself. Her father, watching her, knew that Layla had finally come into her own. She wasn't the woman who had once been humiliated. She was strong, resilient, and unapologetically herself. And for the first time, Layla felt the weight of her past lift completely. Martin's calls stopped coming. The offers he once received dried up. His life, once full of possibilities, was now a shell of what it had been. As the years passed, the world continued to move on, leaving him behind. Layla, on the other hand, flourished. Her father's legacy was now hers to continue, and she was determined to make it her own. She had found peace, not by seeking revenge, but by letting go. In the end, it was not the wealth, the power, or the legacy that had made Layla strong. It was her ability to rise above the darkness, to forgive herself, and to finally take control of her own fate. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all.